Good evening, everybody. My name's Lee Lawrence, and my talk today is called Redefining Justice. And I'm going to share with you my own personal story and journey. On the screen is my mum, Cherry Gross. She was born in Jamaica in 1948, and she came to England in 1962. She raised 6 children, and I'm the second to last one. My mum was well known in our community as somebody who was loving, caring, giving. She would share whatever little she had with whoever she could. It wouldn't be unusual for my mum to take in somebody who was falling on hard times and put them up for a night or a week, sometimes even a month. That's the type of person she was. She was like a lioness to me, and she was always looking out for her cubs. That's me, age 7, in 1981. And if you asked me at that age what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would have said a police officer. I loved all the cop programs, Starsky and Hutch, Cadney and Lacey, The Professionals. I would role play all the time. I grew up in a place called Brixton in South London. And for me, Brixton was a nice, vibrant, fun, safe place to live, full of culture. We played in the streets, was in and out of each other's houses. We didn't even lock our doors. We could borrow milk, sugar from the neighbors, and sometimes even the TV. But that was my reality in my bubble. There was also another reality going on in my community at the same time. Swamp, 81. Suslaw, also known as Stop and Search. Over a 5-day period, 943 people were stopped. 115 were arrested. 75 charged. This created tension between the black community and the police. And it was this unfair treatment which was said to have sparked the 1981 Brixton uprisings. Later on that year, Lord Scarman concluded his report by saying, it was disproportionate and indiscriminate use of stop and search powers that was the catalyst for the 1981 Brixton uprisings. Fast forward 4 years later, I'm 11 years old with a little Michael Jackson afro. Picture this. It's my first day at secondary school. I've got mixed feelings. On one hand, I'm anxious, worried about being bullied. I heard all sorts of stories about people getting their heads flushed down the toilet, and my new secondary school had over 1,000 children there. On the other hand, I was excited to be in a new environment, meet new friends, and wear a school uniform for the first time, even though that was the year that they decided to abolish the school uniform at my school. But I wore one anyway for the first year, and I borrowed my dad's clip-on tie because he was a security guard at the time. My birthday is on the 30th of August. That means I was the youngest child in the whole school, which was quite daunting. But I remember that birthday really well because I got a bike for the very first time. It was a BMX. My mum begged my dad to buy me a bike because before then, I was borrowing other people's bikes or finding scrap pieces of bike and trying to put them together. I had a bike that had no tires and no inner tube. I was just rolling down the street. You could hear me a mile away. So I'd look forward to riding my bike on the weekend. But just 2 weeks into my secondary school experience, this weekend would change my life forever. 7 a.m., Saturday morning, the 28th of September. I'd fallen asleep in my parents' room as we were up the night before watching TV. I heard a noise. So I opened my eyes and I watched my mum walk across the room to the door. Closed my eyes, reassured that whatever it was, Mum was taking care of it. Then I heard another loud noise, a bang. I jumped up this time, and I saw my mum lying on the floor in a pool of blood, and a man standing over her with a gun in his hand, shouting, "Where's Michael Gross? Where's Michael Gross?" And I heard my mum in a faint voice say, "I can't breathe, I can't feel my legs, and I think I'm going to die." At this moment, I got all hysterical. I was jumping up and down on the bed. I was saying, "What have you done to my mum? What have you done to my mum?" And then this man turned around and pointed the gun towards me and said, "Someone better shut this effing kid up." I froze. I turned to the left and I looked at my dad, and I saw fear on his face. And I thought, if my dad's scared and he's an ex-soldier, this must be serious. And that was the first time that I realized that this man was actually a police officer. We got ushered out of the bedroom and into the living room where I joined the rest of my siblings. Lisa, age 8, Sharon, age 13, Juliet, 21, 6 months pregnant, and my mum was babysitting 2 children, 7 and a 2-year-old. There was chaos. We was crying, we were screaming. It felt like a nightmare. There was over 30 police officers in the house, dogs, guns, and all we could think about was, is mum all right? About 20 minutes later, the ambulance came and took my mum into the ambulance, and we was at the window looking at my mum going into the ambulance, and she'd rustle up a little wave and a smile just to try and reassure us in the actual time of suffering. Crowds started to build up outside the house. Press were allowed to come in and take pictures in our most vulnerable moment. And then there was a rumor on the TV that my mum had passed away. So the crowds began to march to Brixton Police Station to demand answers about what had happened. Nobody was saying anything. So they got frustrated. Then they got violent. And then the rest is history. That sparked the 1985 Brixton uprisings. Luckily, the rumor wasn't true, and my mum was still alive. They came to my house looking for my brother, who wasn't there and didn't live there, but shot my mum. 3 days later, we was allowed to visit my mum in the hospital, and I remember that day very clearly walking to the hospital, down the hall, into the room. She had a box over her legs, and the doctor coming in saying that the bullet had lodged in her spine, and now she was permanently paralyzed from the chest down and will never walk again. When we heard those words, it was devastating, and I could only imagine how my mum must have been feeling at that time. My mum spent a year in hospital, and 2 years later, there was a criminal trial. The man who shot my mum, Douglas Lovelock, got acquitted. So there was no justice, and I would spend the next 26 years of my life caring for my mum. Fast forward to 2011, my mum dies as a result of her injuries. She dies on Easter Sunday with her children around her bedside. All the hurt and the pain and the injustice flooded back. But there was a prospect of an inquest which brought us hope that we could revisit what happened to her back in 1985. But that came with its challenges. We were denied legal aid to have a voice in the inquest, whilst the officer who shot my mum had legal representation, Metropolitan Police had representation, Hertfordshire establishment had representation paid by taxpayers' money, and the family was denied. So we had to do a petition, and we was able to get over 100,000 people to sign. We went to 10 Downing Street with the support of our local MP, Chuka Amuna, and everyone who signed that petition. And a week later, Chris Grayling, who was the Chancellor at the time, overturned the decision. So we got legal representation, we had a fair and open inquest process, and the outcome of that was 12 jurors came back with a verdict of serious multiple failings by the Metropolitan Police, and that was the cause of my mum's death. With that came a public apology from the Commissioner at the time, which was a bittersweet moment because we'd waited 29 years to hear that apology. But the person who most needed to hear that apology was no longer with us. So we said, the apology is not enough. We want some accountability for what had happened. And the Met refused to accept accountability. So we spent the next 2 years battling until we ended up in the High Court proceedings. And it was a High Court judge who at the time was querying the Metropolitan Police about why they're challenging this. And that was the first time that they actually conceded and accepted accountability. The High Court judge then recommended that we go into a mediation process and a restorative justice process. So leading up to this process, I had a meeting with my lawyers, and they were trying to manage our expectations about this mediation process. And they were explaining that we shouldn't really go into too much detail about what wouldn't stand in court if we ended up back in court. And I said, if the length of the damage is the length of this stage, I want to talk about the length of the stage. My lawyer then said to me, Lee, I think you should speak at mediation because I'm not going to be able to communicate your story in the way that you can. So it was just the night before it came to me, and I thought I'm going to use pictures to communicate this injustice and the huge impact that it caused upon my mum and us as her family. And that's what I've been doing with you today. With the exception of one picture, my daughter Harmony, who was 8 at the time. And just 2 weeks before we was in this process, she was going to school. And she had a book in her hand. And I said to her, Harmony, what's that book? And I just saw police. So she says, Dad, I've been reading about the fire service, the ambulance service, and now I'm reading about the police. Because she had a phobia about sirens. And I froze and I thought, that book's going to be telling you all the great and wonderful things that the police do. And I'm not saying they don't do some of that stuff. However, we have a very personal story that will counteract what she's reading. How do I tell her that one day with balance? The way I tell her that story is how we resolve this conflict today. And a very high-ranking police officer got up in that moment and said these words. My lawyer is not going to like what I'm about to say, but I would hate for my mum to go through what your mum went through. And then that was the moment. That was the moment of connection. That was the moment that we realized, that you realized what we had been through. After that, we engaged in a healthy discussion, and we came out with some restorative justice outcomes, one of which is a memorial, permanent memorial in Brixton Windrush Square, which will be erected next year, September, to coincide with the 35th anniversary. So I just want to conclude. We didn't receive justice, we achieved justice because we had to fight for it. And we had to redefine what justice was because it came in the form of restorative justice. Justice is about fairness. And if we were treated fairly in the beginning, we wouldn't have gone through any of this, and my mum would still be here today. But she's not, and we can't turn back the clock, so we take strength from that outcome. And I want to leave you with this. I want to encourage you all, whether big or small, to find justice, reconciliation, and peace in your own battles. Thank you.